Okay. So Alex asked me to look into a lawsuit against Meta. And basically what happened was that 33 state attorneys general in the US filed a federal lawsuit against Meta. So just to show you here, this is kind of the court system within the US. And we are here in one of the district courts in San Francisco. So the reason why it is this court, because I thought it was a little bit interesting that it's a federal court that is taking care of that, is simply that several states have put together to sue. So whenever there is like multiple state laws that are infringed, then this goes to federal courts. And in our case, as I said, there's 33 states that decided to sue. And they have alleged two different kinds of infringements. One of the consumer protection, which is ruled by the states themselves. So every single of these state laws for consumer protection are infringed. And then the COPPA, which is the Child Protection Act, which is a federal law. If you have any questions, please interrupt me at any time. So yeah, here again. So basically what was alleged was that Meta created a business model that was focusing on addicting people, especially children under 13, to their social media platforms, and therefore to maximize the time that these children are spending on the social media platforms. And that Meta designed and deployed harmful and psychologically manipulative product features. One's the dopamine manipulating recommendation algorithms, which basically means that they're when you're on a platform like Facebook or Instagram, then you do get some kind of dopamine rush by simple rewards like likes, or there is some kind of games, especially with games, we know that when there is some kind of reward that comes random. So there's no real there's no real time lapse that, you know, after this amount of
May,
time you're getting something, but this
Diana,
kind of, yes?
may I ask, what is an allegation? Is an allegation a claim that is to be proven?
Exactly. So basically, this is from the lawsuit itself.
Yeah,
This is what the states claim that Meta has done
yeah.
wrong.
So it's like, I always like to translate this in mathematical terms because my favorite language is mathematics. Haha.
Yeah,
And in mathematics, this would be a conjecture. Allegation would be a conjecture. So we think it's a theorem, or I think I have a theorem, but I have no proof yet.
mm, and there is some underlying proof of this. So it's
Yes,
not
yes,
just a
it's
hypothesis.
the proof is kind of the justification, the argument of the prosecutors who put in this law case. But
Exactly.
so the role of the judge then in the end is to tell the truth, to say if this allegation is true or not. Did I understand this correctly?
Exactly. The judges
Yeah.
here are to determine whether the laws that are governing Meta are infringed, and whether the state attorneys were right when they alleged these kind of features.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so the dopamine manipulating recommendation is basically just that you're getting some kind of reward that comes randomly and that kind of keeps you on the platform because you like this dopamine rush, which is was compared a lot of times with several kinds of addictions. That's basically the same kind of mechanism that happens in the brain. Then the likes and comparison features that are known to harm young users because they start comparing themselves, and therefore it furthers things like body dysmorphia. Then visual filter features, again, that are promoting body dysmorphia because people can make themselves look in a way that normal people don't look, and others compare themselves to it. And get kind of self-conscious about it. Then the content presentation is designed to discourage users to self-regulate and to disengage from the platform, which is especially important again for children, because children don't have this kind of self-regulation trained very much. So they're already having like kind of a struggle when they try to get away their attention from social media and focus on something else. Obviously, adults are kind of more used to this and have better self-discipline. And then audiovisual and haptic alerts distracting young users, and then ensuring that their attention is on the app, which is basically all of these push notification and fancy lights and everything that is kind of putting your attention back on the phone and therefore on the app. Obviously, Meta is doing that to ensure that their business model is profitable, because how they're making their money in the end is as long as people are engaging with the app and providing personal data in the sense of their behavior and their likes and dislikes, they have a better way of targeting the advertisement that is in the end paying. So the advertisers are paying to place their apps and their advertisements, and obviously the better the algorithm can target the advertisement to people that are likely to buy, the more profitable this advertisement is, and therefore the more money Meta makes. So as we already talked about, there is obviously underlying proof of that, and that is not actually new proof. So the research that this lawsuit is focusing on is quite old. So sorry, the findings that the use of Meta is associated with depression and anxiety, sorry for the typo, insomnia and interference with education and daily life is not something new. Those are studies that are mostly going back to like 2012, 2013. Also, the fact that Meta has been rejecting for a very long time to acknowledge that they are portraying violent and harmful content and bullying and harassment and suicide and self-injury content is nothing new. That has been coming up in several lawsuits earlier, and Meta has always rejected that this is happening, even though it was found that they were aware of that all along. Again, not a very new finding, but obviously it's very important to know that even though Meta has rejected these claims in courts beforehand, they were already aware through internal research that what they had claimed was not actually true. Here, for example, is something that I think is quite interesting. I have introduced the idea that the use of these social media platforms is obviously harmful for children, and basically not only for children, but also for young people, especially for young females indeed. So here you can see a graphic that shows that when Instagram started to rise in popularity, the same time that Instagram rose in popularity, the rates of suicides, self-poisoning, and major depressive episodes in young females basically jumped up an incredible amount. And the indication here is between 2001 and 2018. Instagram rose between 2012 and 2013. That was basically the biggest jump in popularity for Instagram. And you can see beforehand, the numbers were kind of stable. They were always in a range. And then as soon as more and more people started using Instagram, young females became more and more depressed, suicidal, and vulnerable to these kind of social media platforms. So just to summarize here, that was the first claim that the attorneys made. Firstly, Meta knows that it has users under 13, which was proven in several ways. Obviously, there were, firstly, there were several live streams in which there was a discussion between the CEO of Instagram and some kind of influencers that were saying, you know, my follower base is mostly between 9 and 13 years old, and they just rejected to listen. They just said, I don't want to hear about this. Also, the by default way of signing up for Instagram, for example, until very recently was that the age was put to 13 years old by default, because in accordance with their policy, anybody under 13 would require the consent of their parents. So their parents would have to step in and say, okay, you know what, you are allowed to use that, you are allowed to collect the personal data. So Meta was absolutely aware of that. Meta is absolutely aware of the fact that their practices cause physical and mental harm, and it refuses to cease these practices, because it's simply more profitable to have addicted people, even though they're miserable, but only addicted people create enough revenue for their business model to be profitable. So the next claim is against the Child Protection Act, which is basically what I already introduced, namely that the operators of platforms have the duty that when there is a child that is under 13 years old, to let them sign up and to start collecting personal information. The parents have to be able to step in and give consent for them, which is something that Meta has in the past always rejected and is not practicing even today. Let me see. So here you can see this is the second part, and in part 2, to obtain verifiable parental consent for the collection, use, or disclosure of personal information. So that means that basically as soon as a child would sign up, the parents would have to give consent, which is not taking place, and Meta has rejected that for a long time. The claims that are made under the COPPA are basically, again, that Meta knows, and these numbers are from a study that I couldn't verify. It comes from the claim lawsuit itself, but I have to say that much of the lawsuit is actually blacked out, which is kind of remarkable to me. So much of it is not readable. But what was found was that Meta knows that 45% of children between 9 and 12 years in the US use Facebook, and 40% use Instagram. Also, Meta encourages children to misrepresent their age by putting the default option when signing up to 13 years of age. And this encouraging to misrepresenting age is also something that is not allowed under the COPPA. Also, it was...
Diana,
yes.
sorry, one question. What is the difference between claim and allegation?
It's basically the same. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have confused.
Sorry, I'm a nitpicky math nerd. So
no. It's very good that you're saying that.
Technically, from a legal perspective, what you mean here are the allegations. So a claim is the same as allegation.
Not in all senses. So if we're talking about a claim, it can also be a claim for damages, for example. An allegation is rather something negative, and I took the more negative version earlier, and I should have stayed with that because legal claims can be any kind of type. What we're talking about here are claims and allegations at the same time, but I shouldn't have confused the wording.
One of the allegations is Meta knows that 45% of children, blah, blah, blah. This is one of the allegations in the lawsuit.
Exactly. Okay, did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks a lot.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, and it was also claimed that Meta targets children in their advertisement, which is quite obvious because if you look into the advertisements themselves, they are oftentimes portray children, or they are dealing with topics that are interesting to children, like SpongeBob was mentioned, and other kinds of children-affine pages that are also linked and advertised. So it's quite clear that Meta targets children. Interestingly here, I thought was that Meta reacted to this claim right away, and they held their first How to Protect Children conference. And one of the citations that I found was particularly interesting was this one that says, "We support regulators across the globe working together to establish clear, consistent laws that adapt to ever-evolving technologies so they can be implemented successfully by companies across our industry. We are hopeful that continued regulation in this area will seek to preserve teens' right to be online while creating safe, supportive environments for them to express themselves." What is obviously very interesting about that is that there have been an enormous amount of studies proving that Meta knows and is basically indifferent to the fact that they're harming children. What is also very interesting is that here they're saying that they are encouraging states around the globe to create legislation whereas it's very clear that this lawsuit could only happen because there is no legislation, because companies like Meta are heavily lobbying against any kind of legislation that would decrease their revenue by creating safe spaces for children and people in general. I think it's also important to say that even though these studies have been focusing and the lawsuit focuses on children, that does not mean that it's not just as harmful for adults. It is just that for children, the attorney generals were able to file this lawsuit because the US doesn't have any kind of legislation that would otherwise allow for such a lawsuit. So possible consequences that are coming out of this. Obviously, as I said, there were a lot of things blacked out. I believe that the blacked out parts were probably newer evidence that was found, but I can only deduct that from how the text was written. So this is just like my guess. I believe that there could be a chance that the states actually win this case, which would lead to an actually enormous amount of money that Meta would have to pay, because there's the state's attorneys basically want to reach that first the permanent injunction to stop ongoing violations has to be done by the court, which means that Meta has to urgently now stop using these techniques to addict children and to actually harm them physically and mentally. It also means that they have to rethink their business model, probably. But what is more important, they're asking for damages, and they're asking for damages per consumer, which basically means that every single state that was mentioned there, which is 33 states, has probably several thousands or millions of consumers that have been harmed by these practices, and they're asking damages for every single one of them. The amount is kind of in between. 250 was the lowest that I saw, and 2,500 per person was the biggest amount that I saw. So if we're adding that up together with the question to basically the attorneys asking for additional relief, just as the court decides how much that is, could be an enormous amount of money that we're talking about here. And it would be quite revolutionary. That would, I guess, be the first time that a company is hit that hard. The court case was actually compared to the 1990s cases where states started to come together and try to get rid of tobacco companies. So this is something that happens very rarely, that states come together and they put such a huge lawsuit to the courts. So it could be quite revolutionary. It could cost Meta an enormous amount of money. But it could also happen that they're not winning. Once, obviously, there's always the possibility of settling outside of court, which would be much cheaper for Meta, I guess, and would still be some kind of win for the states. So that would mean that basically the proceedings that started in front of the court now are going nowhere. And instead, they settle for a certain amount. That could be, I don't know, 1 billion. And then everybody's happy and everybody's fine and everything just is forgotten about, basically. But it could also happen that Meta actually wins, because the US has very old laws for data protection. And one of them is this Communications Decency Act. And that says that provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So that means that because Meta is not actually creating the content themselves, they're just targeting the content, they would not be able to be held liable for the content that they're targeting, which is obviously something that has been adopted not only by the US, but has also been refused by several states by now, simply for the fact that making this decision of which information is displayed for which person is also some kind of editorial act that Facebook is doing here. Sorry, Meta. But they still have this as an act. Section 230 is still in force. So the lawsuit is actually trying to circumvent that by putting it not only on the Child Protection Act and the Consumer Protection, but by kind of combining that and avoiding any kind of other data protection legislation, so that it would not be under Section 230, but it could very well be that the court finds that because of this Communication Decency Act, Meta has no responsibility here. I'm not sure how likely that is, though. Okay, here are my sources. So basically, I used, you can see the news article, that is the graphic that I showed, and that is the actual lawsuit documentation. As I said, it's quite interesting that much of it is blacked out. I'm not quite sure what they blacked out. But yeah, as I said, I believe that it's probably newer studies. There's also a lot blacked out when it comes to harmful content and suicidal content. So I guess that maybe there have been new studies that revealed something even worse than expected. But yeah, that is basically what I wanted to present to you. Please hit me with any questions.
Thanks a lot, Diana. Excellent review. Are there any questions from the audience?
I was wondering what would be different if this happened in Europe?
Oh, that is an excellent question. Actually, I've been thinking about that a lot. So basically what would be different is we usually don't have many claims where there's like combined action from several actors. But obviously it could happen in Europe. Basically, Europe is very different in the legal system, which is a fortune for us because we do have regulations that would protect children here and that would protect data subjects in general. So in Europe, there's a lot more data protection legislation. Basically, if that would happen, if the AI Act comes into force the way it stands right now, any kind of manipulation that is done on purpose through AI would be a prohibited practice or a high risk practice. And therefore, the chances of winning would be much higher. If you're just looking under the GDPR, the problem with the GDPR would be that the maximum penalty that you can get under the GDPR is 20 million or 4% of the global turnover, which, to be fair, for companies like Meta is never enough. They're just putting that into their risk assessment. They live with the risk, they pay the fine, and they keep on going as they are. So it would be a very different outcome. What I believe is that if it goes through in the US, it would hurt Meta a lot more, and it would have a lot more chances of actually changing the way Meta is dealing with their personal data and with their addictive practices. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Homayun, please.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the nice presentation. I have two questions actually. The first one is that plot that you showed, which shows like the those curves about the usage of Instagram and the rate of suicide. So I can see clearly a very nice correlation between these two. But then proving that this causes that is, I mean, how can they prove that? Is there any hint that shows this is really the Instagram is really the cause of the suicide, or?
Oh yes, that is actually very good. I wanted to mention that and forgot it. So obviously there's like an insane amount of factors that can factor into a rise of suicides. That is not only social media. But there are many instances and many studies that have been conducted about this topic, and this was just one of them. For example, there was a case in the UK only a few years ago where there was a 14-year-old girl that committed suicide after being exposed to suicide and self-injury content on Instagram. And there was actually a case about that. And what was very interesting was that the coroner himself found that the platform had provided content of self-harm, tending to portray self-harm and suicide as an inevitable consequence of a condition that could not be recovered from. So basically, it's not the first time that this is alleged. It's not the first study. And there have been actual real-life cases where suicide or also a mass shooting in the US in a church was referred back to the way that people were influenced by social media. If you want, you can gladly send me a message after the call, and I can send you some other studies if you need
Sure.
more
Yeah.
convincing.
Yeah. Thanks. And one more question. So in the beginning, basically, when you were listing these claims, so there was like Meta is using some visual or audio effects which are like interesting or like in the eye of like children. So then how I see this is that, okay, this is actually a science, like this like any research about like user behavior modeling. So all of those kinds of research should be banned in that sense, because their goal at the end is like when they come to the industry, the goal is to like collect more users, like to be to design the same web page or the same content or the app in a way to like be attractive to the user. So then if you want to like how can I say, like make some claim about Meta, then you should also have the same claims about these kinds of research field and those people who like spend time and doing research to improve these kinds of things. Right? I mean, I'm not saying like it's exactly correct, but it's somehow I cannot really frame it in a good way, but it to me it sounds that it doesn't really make sense to simply say, okay, you designed your app in a way that is attractive for children, so then this is not good because it shouldn't be attractive for the children. But then the question is, how do they design that? There are some research in the background. So then you should avoid people doing those kinds of research.
Yeah, if I may jump in, very good point. Very good point. So it's very important also in the lawsuit, I guess, that the prosecutors or the attorneys, they are very precise what they criticize. So being attractive as a product per se in America, I think is not illegal.
Exactly.
The thing is, if you want to make intentionally harm the health of people, like make it very attractive to smoke cigarettes and make the cigarettes available to kids. So we would also not question this anymore. And still, there might be researchers who study the effect of tobacco. So I also see it important to have research on this, just for the reason to be aware of these dirty tricks. So if we would forbid this research and the associated teaching, then maybe somebody has the resources to study this field, but only in a private institute, and nobody would really know, would ever debunk them. So we need the research to know the bad guys, so to say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, actually my point was that was the same, like there should be some clear definition of like what we want to sue Meta for.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I think this is one of the key challenges to make this clear, and not to make it clear and then what you target. So the law that you claim is infringed is you're really is rock solid, because then as Diana pointed out, the defense might then turn it around and say, look, but we have this other law who says we are just transferring knowledge, so we are just the transmission line, so you cannot sue us for that. So it's important that this is very clear in the allegations, that they don't what they target.
And one last question. This will be my last question. Sorry. So I was thinking like the same actually claims could hold about other companies. Like, so the other day I was like, I wanted to watch in particular, when you want to watch a video in YouTube, which is like of content like violence, like footages of war and stuff like that, usually you need to log in. And when you want to log in, so it's just like a Google account. And there again, you have the same, like by default, you are over 13, 15, whatever. I don't remember what was. So this also holds for other companies. Why not suing other companies for the same reason?
Very good point. And if so, maybe Diana knows more. If the prosecutors would target this, then Meta could defend itself and say, look, so many others are doing it also, so we are treated unfairly here.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Hello. I'm sorry, my laptop just decided to leave me. I'm with Shu now. I only heard a
Yeah.
part of it.
So I think the question is now, what exactly are they targeting in the allegations? Is it, for example, are they allegations also targeting the low efforts put into verifying the age? Because then the defense could say, but look, so many other services also fall short in strictly testing the age of the consumers. For example, how often are you asked for your ID card when you buy alcohol? Well, okay, I'm not asked anymore, but my wife sometimes is asked because she looks so youthful. And I must say, yeah, in Finland, this is pretty strict, but in Austria, for example, I rarely see anybody asking for an ID when they buy alcohol.
Yeah, it was, of course, one of the allegations that unfortunately Diana is not in the meeting anymore, but I'm sure it was one of the allegations that by default, Meta basically assumed that people are over 13. So then it allows people to come in.
Yeah.
But this is the same for other like
Yeah,
Google and
yeah.
other companies.
Yeah.
I'm actually here. I'm sorry. I'm just
Okay.
talking to Shu
Diana is
now.
now Xu.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm sorry. So yeah, the fact that Meta is not actually restricting who, like the age, that was one of the main things. Simply because Meta does have an internal policy that says anybody who is under 13 cannot be on Instagram unless their parents allow it, and they will close any kind of account for under 13-year-olds where this is not the case. That is why you can actually even report these accounts.
But isn't there the risk, if this is one of the main allegations, isn't then the risk that Meta could say, look, there's this service, that business where there's exactly the same problem. So you're treating us unfairly because you only sue us. Is this a risk?
No, not really.
Okay.
So for the EU, it would be indeed impossible to make that argument because the EU puts additional requirements for extremely big platforms. And Meta is acting as a gatekeeper, so it falls under an additional regulation. And for the West, an argument that I'm doing something wrong, but everybody else is doing something wrong as well, fortunately does not hold in court.
Damn.
Yeah. I'm sorry, was there another question that I missed actually?
Yeah, I guess the first question, if I may repeat, and if I understood correctly from Homayun, so the proof, there's a whole scientific field about causality or measuring, detecting causal influence or causal relations. So even if a child or if somebody watched an Instagram content just before doing something, how can you be sure that this was really this Instagram content that triggered that action? I guess this is physically, I think it's not possible. You would need to study the brain signals of the person to see really, now there was the content, now is the action. But I guess in the end, this is what the judge decides. So the judge then decides if this was causal by Instagram or not.
Yeah, there are underlying studies. For example, there are studies on how the use of social media has impacted college students. There was one quite famous study that said that that actually had people trying social media and the people that abstained from social media. And it was quite clear that the people that tried social media got hooked very fast, and their grades and their mental health went down quite quickly. So yeah, in the end, obviously there is more than one factor, but there is an enormous amount of empirical evidence that does actually tend to prove that.
And do the judges refer to such studies, to research papers a lot?
It's not the task of the judges, it's the task of the people, in this case, bringing the lawsuit. And they have referred to a lot of studies that have been around for a long time, yes.
Yeah. So to some extent, it's also us researchers who write or who conduct these studies and publish them have actually an impact on the court decision in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously,
Yeah.
this is a like high level case. Oftentimes in court, you will not find much of this kind of research because lawyers are under a lot of time pressure when doing that. But this suit has been very well prepared and has actually included many studies.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Are there any other